Call Center Coach develops and unites the next generation of call center leaders. Through our e-learning and community, individuals gain knowledge and skills in the 6 core competencies that is the blueprint that develops high-performing call center leaders. Successful supervisors do not just happen. So go to callcentercoach.com to learn more about enrollment and download your copy of the Supervisor Success Path ebook now. Okay, Fast Leader Legion, today I'm excited because I have somebody on the show today who's going to help all of us advance a very, very important skill that is becoming more important as days go by, and that's our emotional intelligence. Dan Hill was born in Minot, North Dakota, and raised mostly in East Dakota, more commonly known as Minnesota. Dan's childhood had one major, unique, disruptive event. At age 6, the family, including his mom and sister, all moved to Italy because his dad had received an assignment from the 3M company to manage a film processing plant along the Italian Riviera. Suddenly, Dan found himself in first grade in an Italian fishing village and, not knowing the language, could only participate in the math lessons, and all his other time went to reading the body of language of his new classmates and teacher and trying to get the lay of the land. A year and a half later, as the family was headed to England to get a boat home to America, came a second, ultimately significant event. In Amsterdam, Dan saw the paintings of Rembrandt, which spurred his interest in emotions, personalities, and expressions. It's on our faces, after all, that we best reveal our feelings, and eventually Dan would be an art history minor in college in St. Olaf College before going on to receive a PhD in English from Rutgers University. Ever since his early adventures in Europe, Dan has been an explorer, curious about learning more and most everything. Nothing remains more fascinating, however, than human nature. The third big event in Dan's life and his career came in 1998 when Dan was working at a consulting company focused on the customer experience, trying to ghostwrite a book for the company's president, and somebody his boss knew at IBM sent over an article about the breakthroughs in brain science and their implications for business. The underlying truth, about 95% of our mental activity is subconscious, and our reactions to the world are primarily sensory and emotive. They're not rational. Armed with that insight, Dan decided to launch his own company, Sensory Logic, that pioneered the use of, in business, of the scientific tool called facial coding to capture and quantify customers' emotional experiences. His company has gone on to do work for over 50% of the world's top 100 business-to-consumer companies, and he's also applied the tool in presidential politics and pro sports. Dan's contribution to society and the business world is bringing the role of emotions front and center. Since Dan's pioneering efforts, major players like Apple, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, and Amazon have followed his lead. The Economist magazine has described the result of combining AI with the automation of facial coding as the emerging facial industrial complex. Nowadays, Dan lives in alternating seasons in St. Paul, Minnesota and Palm Desert, California with his wife, Karen Bernthal, a retired clothes designer. When not working, you're likely to find him either on a tennis court or watching a movie for fun. Dan Hill, are you ready to help us get over the hump?
Absolutely. Nice to meet you, Jim.
Well, thank you. Now, Dan, you've actually authored several books, but the book that we're going to be talking about today kind of brings together a lot of the research and findings that you have, and I love the way that you did it. It's called Famous Faces Decoded. So, Dan, tell us about your current passion and how we can get to know you even better.
Sure. Well, with this book, I really wanted to give it something that made it relatable for people. So I wanted celebrity stories. So I took Hollywood stars, I took music stars, certainly business leaders and politicians, media types, anything that people can relate to where there's a backstory, because that makes it much more human and much more accessible. So I'm trying to cover what are the triggers of emotions, what do they mean, how do they show in the face, and what in the world can you do about it all to plug it back in to make both your career and your personal life, you know, more pleasant, more effective, but make you a better Minch.
Well, better Minch. Now, I would say when you start talking about, you know, the skill that you have currently and continuously built over the past, 2+ decades, is becoming in more need and demand today than it is ever before. Now, what are the forces that are causing that to happen?
Well, I think one is screen time. We are so caught up in looking at the text messages and thumbing this and that back to somebody. We have lost track of the fact that we are everything in business is people to people. And that means you have to understand who's there. We desperately send all these emoticons to correct the miscomprehensions, the miscommunication that happens because of what we just typed on this device. I remember being at a meeting at McDonald's and the woman said, "Oh, just a second, my boss in Germany just misunderstood what I just typed. I have to desperately send another message." If you read the face of someone, there's so much information there. Someone has said that the most vital 25 square inches of territory in the world is in the middle of the face. It is, right around our eyes, our nose, our mouth. And the first person who got this is probably the most brilliant person who ever lived, Da Vinci, Leonardo da Vinci. If you look at his notebooks, what you'll discover is that he looked at human anatomy. He came to understand how we express our emotions. So in all the other brilliant things he did, it took another 200 years for anyone to be as good as Da Vinci was in understanding emotions as displayed in our faces. That's why Mona Lisa is such a fascinating painting. The same thing that goes into the painting, you should apply to your daily life. It could be in a call center contact. It could be in a business meeting with your boss. It can be going home and talking to your spouse afterwards. But get yourself with a higher emotional IQ and you're gonna be better off.
Well, I think it's also important here for us to really kind of put a little bit, more of a focus in on, the discipline that we're talking about here. So this falls under emotional intelligence. And there's two things that you talk about in the book is that we have social intelligence and then we have our personal intelligence. And part of this is some of that self-discovery component, how are we expressing ourselves and then how to read that in others. But it's also important to note that like you had mentioned, is that a lot of this is just subconscious response. So somebody may not even have cognitively understood that their face displayed something. Is that correct?
Oh, it's absolutely correct. Emotions are really contagious. And the emotion we give off, we're going to get back. It's tit for tat in a whole bunch of situations in life. And the better you can pick up on those dynamics, the better off you're going to be. And yes, as a person, we tend to have patterns. Everything in life has patterns. We have what I call signature expressions. There's a wonderful comment from the writer George Orwell who said, by the age of 50, a man has the face he deserves. Because we have muscle memory. And if you make a certain expression over and over, it eventually etches itself into your face. And that's going to change the dynamic of who you're interacting with. If you tend to anger, if you're a hothead, it's going to show up. And that's going to have some implications for how your conversation goes.
As you were saying that, it kind of brings me to this, thing that I found on the internet and has been shared probably tens of thousands of times, where they talk about this resting, BITCH face, right?
Yes.
And it's true. I mean, it's, like sometimes we look at people, it's like, why are you angry at me? It's like, they're not even thinking about you, right?
Oh, absolutely. And part of that comes from you have really attractive women. And they have this resting BITCH face because they don't have to use their social skills. It's almost as if they are the, I guess I'll say, gender female equivalent of a really rich guy. If I've got a lot of money or really great looks, then I've got something in the bank. And maybe I'm signaling in a way that I don't really have to interact with you in a decent way, in a fair level playing field sort of way, that I'm above you. And so that means I can go to anger, I can go to contempt, or I can go to no emotion at all because I'm not going to make the effort to interact with you.
Well, and when we start thinking about that in today's world, where it's an experience-based economy, we really have to connect with customers, colleagues, all of those things. That can have some serious impact in our ability to, excel to positions of greater responsibility, that can impact our income. We talk about emotional intelligence affecting a significant portion of our ability to experience success, and monetary is right with it. But one of the things that we don't talk about is this variability of emotional intelligence. And to me, this is a core one because it's kind of that first impression, gold mine or tragedy.
Oh, absolutely. Just last night, I had dinner with Joe Pine. He's the co-author of The Experience Economy. So there's no way in business, you're always going to have an experience. It could be good, it could be bad, it could be indifferent. And what you're going to have with an experience, you're going to have emotions. It's a story that's unfolding. And as Hollywood knows, any story is going to involve emotion. And what's the emotional pay dirt on the backside? One of my favorite comments about business is that there are two emotions in business as in life. One is dollars and one is emotions. And if you take care of the second one, the first one's going to look a whole lot better.
Most definitely. Okay, so now let's talk about the specifics of being able to do this type of detection and interpretation and analysis. So
Sure.
you have identified 7 core emotions, but then you also talk about 4 forms per emotion, and all of this goes into 23 different expressions. So if you could kind of break this down for us.
Sure. So there are 7 emotions in facial coding. 3 of them are approach emotions. So that means that I'm moving toward my target, my object. The positive one is happiness. I am going to hug. I'm going to embrace. I'm going to be open to consideration. If I'm in a contact center, I'm, customer contact center, I'm talking to someone, and in the future, and why this is relevant is because we're going to have technology that enables us to not just hear their voice, but see their face, and they can see our face. And so all that telepathy or empathy, all that contagion is going on emotionally. So it's really important to know that happiness is not a trivial emotion. People who are happy tend to get to superior solutions and more quickly. They are really good at brainstorming. So if I've got a customer problem and I'm coming across as a happy camper, it's probably not just that I'm coming across with a fake smile. It means that I am really expansive and trying to figure out how to connect with you and get to a better solution. That's fabulous. Now, the other heavy hitter emotion is anger, because happiness and anger together are about 70% of everyone's emoting on average, 70%. So the other 5 that we can cover are only the other 30%. What's the essence of anger? To hit. So happiness to hug, anger to hit. So you have somebody who's calling in, this customer, they're calling in because they're not happy. So now we're quite possibly in the realm of anger. They could be confused about how your company's offer works, the kind of service they got or failed to get, and why. So it could be confusion. It could be resistance, like, you did this to me. I am not accepting that kind of treatment. It could be that they don't see a path to progress, because anger can also mean we feel like we're losing control of our situation, that there are barriers to our progress, and we get angrier to the extent that we think the barriers are unfair. So anytime you start with this kind of thing, you have to say, do I got happiness, anger? Do I have some other emotion? And then let's stay with anger, because it's so likely to be important to what we're talking about. 4 forms of anger. 1 is super intense anger. This is like the dog where you took away its bone and it's growling at you. And so a really reliable way to see this is that the lips will tighten together. The mouth will be really tight, and there'll be a bulge below the middle of the lower lip, a telltale bulge sticking out. That is an angry person. And the first thing you're going to have to do in business, as in life, is try to bring the anger quotient down. Try to bring some calm to this situation. Otherwise, you got a nuke reactor that's about to blow. It's 3 Mile Island all over again. So that's the most intense version. There's another version where the eyes narrow and the eyebrows come down, and they're kind of like giving you the hard snake eyes look. That's not quite as bad as what I just gave you, but it's also worrisome. The next one, I think, in business you can work with. This is concentration. The eyebrows will come together. The lips will come together, but lightly. There's no bulge below the middle of the lower lip. This is someone that's a reasonable person. They are concentrating on their words. They're trying to take in your message. They're trying to figure out how to make this into a win-win. You can work with that person. Your best thing that you can hope for, if you're in customer contact role, is what I call the golden blend. This is the last of the 4 forms of anger, a mixture of happiness and anger. So they're expansive, they're receptive. You can talk to the person, but they also have a purpose. They are signaling at certain moments with that anger that they do indeed want to get to an outcome. And let's get there sooner than later, if you don't mind.
As you're talking, I'm sitting there and thinking about some of the things that we talk about in the contact center space in regards to speech analytics, voice biometrics. And well, to me, when we start talking about this, our next frontier is going to be the whole, facial decoding biometric.
Absolutely.
And then I start thinking about the whole ability to infuse AI into that, where it's actually being able to read faster than we can, and it's giving us cues.
Yeah, no, I think what's going to happen in the future is you're going to eventually have not just the ability to see their face and them to see your face. You're going to have a little output if you're working at one of these centers, and you're going to actually have it identified for you in real time what emotion they're feeling. But where that still leaves you is the ability to have emotional intelligence and say, it's anger. And anger means these sorts of things. I don't have control, I'm not making progress, I'm resistant to what you're doing, I'm confused, or even I'm resentful. You've offended me in some way. You've challenged my value system. So you got 5 probably really good possibilities. Which one is it that helps explain the anger that's just been identified for you or that you picked up yourself through the voice, through the face, through the software, once we have that opportunity? So how can I then plug that into my solution? If it's confusion, you believe, because the eyebrows are pinching together and lowering, that just means you got to get back to clarity. You have to say a question to them like, what is it here that you really don't understand? If you think it's lack of progress, maybe it's, what one thing here do you think is really holding us up the most? Or what do you think is unfair here? And that's going to give you the lead in to get to a solution that's going to take that anger away from them.
Well, I start thinking about this. I mean, I start looking at your work in this, and you've actually been awarded several patents. I mean, do these patents that you've been awarded, will they assist and support what we're talking about here and making it to where I can now start doing this at scale? I can start interpreting at scale. I can start, really connecting, at scale.
Yes, and they also involve some extra permutations. Now let's switch over to happiness, because that's the other vital emotion that happens so often. But there are different levels of happiness. So joy is when the muscle around the eye relaxes and you get the twinkle in the eye. It's called a true smile because you can't fake it. And if you can bring the customer to that moment, that's golden, because we'll pay good money to be extremely happy. As Woody Allen said, happiness makes up in height what it lacks in length. So if we can get that high elation moment, great. The smile you have to worry about isn't really a smile. It is the begrudging little smile. It's a half smile. It's really brief on the face. That means something like, that's the worst joke I ever heard, but at least you tried to humor me. So you might say, I've got them smiling now. No, they're just kind of on the window ledge. And it could turn back and flip into anger or some other negative emotion really readily. And in between that is, what I call pleasure and satisfaction. You're in play, but they could go high or low, and it's all volatile. And you need to keep track of where you're actually at in that process.
Okay, so you talk about this 23 expressions,
Yep.
and I'm actually subconsciously looking and doing the interpretation, but I need to be able to pull those into my conscious or cognitive mind. And you actually talk about a progression or maturity process that we all have to go through. And it's, first of all, it's emotional literacy, and then we have to understand how emotion shows on faces. And then also we have to be able to apply forms of expression. So, I mean, realistically, what does that process look like for us to be able to gain these skills? I mean, you've been doing it for a couple of decades, but how can someone really go on a pathway to actually getting better at this?
Sure. Well, I wanted to write my book to make it more accessible. Dr. Ekman, bless his heart, the professor who's the expert at this, his manual was 500 pages long. 500 pages full of tedious instructions. So I boiled the whole thing down to less than half that length, and it's full of stories and examples and visuals that you can relate to with celebrities you all know. So the real key here is those expressions are not that hard to learn. It's 23, it's not 97. It's 23 expressions, and you're probably going to find, as the average person, that you gravitate to certain expressions that just naturally you can pick up readily, that just are in your wheelhouse, so to speak. Because anger is so common, you're going to see it a lot, and you should just start with the mouth. Is the mouth open? If it's closed, is it closed a little bit? Is it closed really tightly? Is it closed so much that it's like a dog who, again, the bone has been taken away from it and it's a growl? What level of anger do you see? I think anybody can do that, and they can do it quickly. You might think a certain expression is important to you. I would suggest you go to contempt. When the corner of the mouth pulls up and wide, and you have a little, what I call pocket tornado, a little tension with an indentation in the corner of the mouth, that's a sign of disrespect and distrust. It is the most reliable indicator that a marriage will fail. In fact, at the University of Washington, Seattle, they have a love lab. Couples in distressed marriages come in with 10 minutes of videotape facially coded. a 90% accuracy rate that the couple will stay married or not. 90%. So if it's not good to show contempt between spouses, you can imagine between a customer and a company, also bad news. So I would say, yeah, there's 23 expressions. Whatever you do, pick up contempt, because trust is the emotion of business. Contempt is its opposite. And then go back to the heavy hitters. Smiling's easy in a way. Is it just around the mouth? Is it the twinkle in the eye? If it's anger, start with the mouth, how much compression there is there. I learned facial coding in simply one weekend. I took Ekman's manual, and maybe I have an advantage because I lived overseas and I'm visually oriented and an art minor. But honestly, I took his manual. I said, what are the important parts? And I threw a bunch away. I cut out the parts that mattered to me. I looked at any place where I had a visual that could help me, because we're visual learners. And before the weekend was over, and I did put in probably 35 hours, but before the weekend was over, I felt I had a reasonable grasp of what these were. So I think with my book, which is much more accessible than Ekman's manual, I've already done the cutting and the pasting for you, basically, and there's just a small number of diagrams you have to go to. So go to the emotions that are most common, go to the emotions that are most important, go to the emotions that you simply seem to have a proclivity for in terms of picking up.
Well, and as you're talking, there's a couple of things that start hitting. I mean, I start hitting me. I start thinking about even the hiring process.
Yes, and we should bring in one other element. So there are 7 core emotions, but one that's really important is another way of looking at emotional engagement in your face is, are they engaged emotionally? Do they show any emotions? Because motivation and emotion have the same root word in Latin, movere, to move, to make something happen. I would say there's nothing worse than 2 qualities in someone you're going to hire. One is flat affect. They don't care. This is just a job. This is what a friend of mine said. well, you have a lot of until workers. And what he meant by that was until 5 o'clock, until the next job, until you fire me because you're wising up, et cetera, et cetera. You do not want to hire that sort of person if you can help it. So lack of engagement is really worrisome. I had a person who I hired in. He was smart as could be, and he couldn't have cared less. It didn't work out optimally. The other thing I think you really have to worry about actually in hiring is fear. And the most reliable way that fear shows is that the mouth pulls wide. And why is this a problem in who you hire? Because someone who is paralyzed by fear, who freezes up because of fear, will not have self-initiative. They will wait for you to tell them what to do, and then they'll wait for you to tell them 3 more times, and then they'll take up your time by asking, did I do it right? And a lot of hand-holding is going to have to happen. And so lack of engagement, fear, really bad news. And then I would say, yes, contempt actually, because if they don't respect you and you're hiring them in, your staff meetings are going to be a disaster. It's going to be like you can film Mutiny on the Bounty with people like this. You just don't need the headache and the heartache.
Well, and even as you're talking, I'm starting to think about their feelings about themselves too, and how much that could come out to play. I mean,
sure.
For me, if I'm finding that I'm having to take a step down, maybe I have contempt for myself that I'm actually applying for this position. I mean, all these things started running through my head. So how do we know that we're actually interpreting correctly? I mean, is there a way that we can, be conscious, read something, and then maybe go into some voice dialogue, some voice Q&A, something to help us really understand if we've interpreted correctly?
Jim, that's an excellent point. Yes, you need to do some diagnostics, some follow-up to make sure that your read, that you can really narrow down what it means. So let's take the smirk, because I'm putting a lot of emphasis on contempt here. Do I see a contempt expression along with a smile, maybe even just a slight smile? Well, that could actually be confidence. So you might have a follow-up question, what's your skill set here? Why do you think you're so good for this job? Why do you think you can step into the role readily and make it happen? Because that sort of combination of a smirk and a smile, well, one guy who shows it is Tom Brady. And if you can hire someone on your staff who's got the career statistics of Tom Brady, who was a pretty low draft choice, that's good news. But if you see a contempt expression with some anger, now I'm going, so there's some resistance there. And there's some superiority given off because they got the smirk going and they find me beneath them. So now is it back to themselves? This is a low-level job. You might want to ask where they're going to be in 5 years. How do they see their career progressing? How does this job role fit into that? Is it, they don't like a command and control structure? So they think that where they are in the organization, who they have to report to, your style as a boss. I mean, you might not be able to ask those questions directly, but you might say, what kind of organizational structure you think you excel in? Are you a good team player? You like to take individual initiative? You like direction from a boss? How much coaching do you want? You have to do, your question is so good because you're going to have to stay in that game. You're going to have to play Sherlock Holmes. You're going to have to go to a couple other levels probably to really know you picked up the signal and made the best use of what you were seeing.
And I do have to bring up, because you and I had this discussion off mic and previously, is there was a television show that kind of made a lot of this famous called Lie to Me that I actually just loved. And it unfortunately didn't go on for more than a season or two. But one of the things that they brought out, because it started becoming in the limelight, is how they said that this particular science is a fuzzy science. What would be your rebuttal to that?
Well, I think it's fuzzy in two respects. One is a lot of people think this is just a lie detection device. And as Dr. Ekman would tell you, there is no lie detection facial movement. There's nothing that gives away the person's being deceptive. Because think about it from an evolutionary point of view. Do we all want to go around with an expression that tells people immediately I'm a liar? No, we're not going to live very long. We're not going to get hired. No one's going to want to marry us, so on and so forth. So human beings are more subtle than that. So yes, sometimes it might be that you try to go to a flat affect, a poker face. It might be that you get indignant and say, I did not have sexual relations with that woman. And you're pointing your lip, you're acting really defiant, like, how could I possibly be lying? Or to be nonpartisan about it, you could have Richard Nixon being interviewed about Watergate by David Frost and saying, I was not a crook and the president can do whatever he wants. Nixon showed so much fear in that interview. There was really no question. But, different people will show this in different sorts of ways. So I think that's one of the reasons why people think it's quote unquote fuzzy, because I just want to know if they're lying. No, it's not that simple. The other reason I think it gets a little bit fuzzy is because people think every expression should go to just one emotion. And some do. So when the lips press tight, that's anger. When the mouth pulls wide, that's fear. But you have other times, like for instance, when the eyebrows in the middle shoot upwards and pull together, that actually shows surprise, because anytime the eyebrows go bigger, the eyes actually have a more expansive territory. They can see more. So surprise is about taking in information. Something has changed in your world. So that's one thing that expression shows. But it also shows fear, in part because the eyes are pinching together like, oh my God, something new, but what is it? And finally, the eyebrows coming together and arching up also reveals sadness. I can remember so distinctly there was an instance where there was some hostage taking at an elementary school. And the father got there, they managed to subdue the terrorists, and he got his young boy back in his hands. But the boy still had the sadness on his face, because sadness can indicate that you feel alone, that you're betrayed, that it's hopeless. And I'm sure there was a point where that young boy in the school with the terrorists felt like it was hopeless. And that feeling did not go away quickly. So you got three different emotions going on. And now I'm Sherlock Holmes, and I have to get to which of those emotions might be most pertinent. Did they start out with fear and it kind of like baked into them and they got to a point where they felt like it's hopeless and I'll never get out of this situation? Is it the sadness that's the most important thing? Or was it surprise, and then we can move through the surprise and they're eventually going to be able to cope? So I do have to take those emotions into account. And so some of the expressions go to a solo emotion and some of them go to 2 or 3. And that's important, because the biggest critique that's been made by people is like, well, I'm just going to show them one photograph that's supposedly going to tell me who they are. And this expression is going to show all the ways of sadness being shown or anger being shown. That's unlikely, because those have multiple expressions. Or I've got an expression in my face and it goes to more one emotion. Well, I don't want to deal with complexity. Well, sorry, life is not always a McDonald's hamburger. Sometimes you've got to sit down to the meal and think about it a little bit longer and take more time. Sometimes you have to.
Well,
So
and
that's why it's fuzzy, but it's not so fuzzy. It's just got some limitations like everything else in life.
Well, I think that's a very good point. And I also, I would think that you have to really kind of what you said, take that approach, is that it's more investigative in nature, and that I want to be able to, help myself make a better decision. And so knowing this information becomes important. And when I start thinking about this, I also start thinking about the separation between, the average and the extraordinary. I would dare to say that people who have, extraordinary performance, and if we can look at that across a multitude of different industries and career types and, different permutations, is that they probably have, if they haven't studied it, a natural starting point that's above normal in regards to interpreting these.
Yeah. Well, let's go back to the two situations you mentioned. So I got a person across the desk from me, and it's a job interview. I would understand that they might be a little bit afraid when they start the interview. Who is this person? How's it going to go? And so forth. But you would hope that the fear subsides a bit as you move through the interview. You would also hope that you're building some rapport with the person, because you're going to be spending a lot of time together. So do they laugh at your jokes? Do you find some commonality? If you don't get some happiness in that blend somewhere, this is a bad decision to hire this person. If I'm on the phone with someone, there's a really good chance that they'll be calling in with anger or disgust or fear. So let me cover each of those. Why could they have fear? Because they're calling in because they didn't get what they wanted. There was no customer service as far as they're concerned, but they're not as powerful as you. They've already given their money over to the company. They're looking for you for a solution, but they realize they're the midget and you're the giant. You've got all the resources, you got their money, and are you going to really help them out? So can you move them off that fear? If they call in with disgust, well, disgust is really a classic way is the nose wrinkles. Something smells bad. Or the upper lip curls because something tastes bad. So as far as they're concerned, you just gave them curdled milk. You gave them sour milk to drink, and they would love to get away from that. Or the anger because, there is a barrier to them getting the outcome they want. So it's really easy to imagine that the person calling in has one of those three expressions or those emotions going on. You should, if you're good at your job, you should be finding a way to deflate those emotions, move them toward happiness. And if you want a breakthrough moment, look for the surprise. Look for that instance where the eyebrows lift, the eyes go wide. That means you've made your breakthrough. So happiness could be just around the corner, thanks to the fact that you found a way to explain it to them or give them something they go, I follow that, I get that, and now I can be happy.
Well, talking about all of this, there's a lot of frustration in our inability to do this well, and a whole lot of surprise when we do have the breakthrough. But we look at emotions in a lot of different ways on our show. And one of the things that we look at are quotes, hopefully to help us focus and be able to have better outcomes. So is there a quote or two that you like that you can share? You shared several in the book, but bring one or two to our audience.
One of my favorites from J.P. Morgan, the banker. Now, he put it only in male terms, but it's really obviously applies to men and women alike. He said, a man makes a decision for two reasons, the good reason and the real reason. And so what we're talking about here is the real reason, because what the breakthroughs in brain science and common sense would tell us is it's the emotions that clothe and pack the punch in terms of, the real motivation for something taking place. So that's absolutely true. Another one I love is from Oscar Wilde. He said, only shallow people don't judge others based on appearances. Because there is a wealth of information, again, in our face. You're crazy not to pay attention to it. But what do? We scurry off to the answer. It's almost as if we want to be lied to. Like, oh, yeah, you said the right thing, so I'll put the check mark and I'm going to hire you, for instance. No. Look for the evidence. Actions speak louder than words, and these little quick micro expressions in the face are action. Do the words and the emotions go together? Or to put it another way, they've got speaking points, talking points as they come in to be hired, but are the feeling points matching up? And earlier I mentioned this whole thing about engagement. So another lovely quote, someone said, well, we're always talking about, sorry, I wasn't thinking. How about, sorry, I wasn't feeling? Because you really don't want to be around someone who isn't feeling. Think about, one's personal life. Do you want to talk to a brick wall? No, you don't. Do you want to talk to them in a staff meeting? No, you don't. Does the person calling into the call center want to talk to a brick wall? No, they don't. So it is so important. So there's three for you.
Oh, I appreciate that. Okay, so now talking about, this progression and this journey and all of those things that are associated with getting to the point to where you are today and amass this wealth of expertise. Is I'm sure there's humps that you've had to get over.
Sure.
We can learn a lot by those. Can you share one of those stories?
Well, even though I'm a facial coder and I picked up a signal, that doesn't mean I always practice EQ as well as I wished I could. So I'm in Toronto and I'm talking to someone. I'm trying to get them to buy our market research services. And there's always the problem that there's an incumbent. It's in politics, it's with a supplier. So the guy had a system in place already. And I had to dislodge it. Well, you have to dislodge things pretty carefully most times. As the poet Emily Dickinson said, tell the truth, but tell it slant, lest everyone go blind. The straight on attack is much too hard for most people. A softer touch. Well, obviously at some point I got pressing a little too hard, because what did I get back? Tit for tat. I got the lips pressed together and that telltale bulge below the middle of the lower lip. I spent the rest of the meeting desperately trying to get that expression off his face and assure him that I was a lighter touch and would be a very reasonable person to interact with. It did not make a difference. I never really got a true smile out of the guy. I didn't get anything even close. And I left and I said, that's it. I said, I can send the follow-up email. I can send the follow-up phone call, the voicemail. I ain't getting the sale. And that proved to be the case. So sure, I'm fallible. We all are. It's just trying to improve your odds day by day. But I can give you a counterexample if I could.
Oh, please.
So I was doing some advising work for the University of Minnesota basketball team for Tubby Smith, who's one of the very few coaches to get to 500 career wins. So the tallest guy on the team, I interviewed everyone on the team, but this guy just floored me. Because I had a question that I thought was a great interview question that I picked up from a friend of mine in New York, which was, how would your mom describe you? Because they don't expect that question. It's going to be a very revealing question. It's an interactive question. And the guy couldn't get an answer out of his mouth. Nothing. And I mean, we went 20 seconds. I mean, it was like eternity before he finally said anything, and he never really gave me an answer. So I said to Tubby, have anyone else interviewed him? He said, oh yeah, we have a team psychologist. I said, so what's going on here? He said, the guy has a really dominant mother and a mouse of a dad, and he's basically traumatized. And I said, well, Tubby, that means you're going to have to interact with him, effectively. A softer touch is going to work well. Tubby sometimes pulled that off, sometimes, wanting the victory. He didn't get there, and I tried to intervene as delicately as I could. And then one time I had a great success. They were playing Indiana. They were the #1 team in the country. We were down about 6 points at halftime. Tubby's really pressing them to win, but he's not giving them encouragement. And by now I had taken to calling this guy the Scarecrow. So I said to Tubby, can I say a few words? He said, okay. So I told them, you're only 6 down. They're #1 in the country. They have everything to lose. You're not even in the top 20. So if you just keep it close, they're going to be more scared of losing down the stretch than you are. They've got more to lose than this game. They've got their ranking. And I could see the Scarecrow relax, and then I could see the Scarecrow smile. And in the second half, we won, and the Scarecrow twice went into the paint, went to the basket, and stuffed it. He hadn't done that all season, twice in a row. Second time he did it, my parents were at the game. I turned to my dad. I said, tonight we win. And we did. So, did I intervene successfully with Tubby all the time to get him to interact with the Scarecrow right? Not always. But one time I got the chance to take the power into my own hands, and I got to an outcome that I think really did help the team. So, you cozy things along as you can.
Well, I think you also bring up a really interesting point when we start talking about performance and coaching and managing and leading, and that as leaders, to us be more effective, we have to properly interpret. We have to properly engage. We have to properly say the right thing so that the environment is created where people motivate themselves. And I think that's a critical component that I always push back on, is that we can't motivate people. That comes from inside. What we can do is create the right environment. And by you saying what you said, therefore the right environment enabled him to motivate himself to, in the paint, jam it twice.
Yeah, no, he needed some more confidence. He needed some breathing room. A lighter hand on the reins is going to help in this case. So we talked about hiring, and that's you're going to make a decision. They're on board, they're not on board. If you're talking with the person in the call center, that's one interaction probably of whatever duration. But it's also true that if you're working in the call center, you've got a boss and you've got colleagues. Are you getting along well with the colleagues? Are they treating you well? Is there rapport? Do people like their boss? I've been brought into situations where I'm working with sales forces, and sales forces are often out on their own. It can be a lonely job, and you hear no a lot. So you really want your boss to have your back and to be supportive, and not just saying, you didn't meet your quota, you didn't meet your quota, you didn't meet your quota. So that whole atmosphere, that whole team chemistry is really important. And that's one of the things I look for, and that's another way in which EQ absolutely applies in a business context.
Oh, most definitely. Okay, so when I start looking at all of this, your body of work and the work that you're doing, is when I start thinking about you have some goals that you want to accomplish. Can you share one of those with us?
My next goal is actually to get this out into the world for people in a really practical way. So what I'm about to launch is probably 2-day training sessions. And it's not like you're just going to sit around and do tests for 2 days. I want them to get it out in the world. So the really fun part of these 2 days that I'm planning is to say, now we're going to go to an art museum. I'm going to actually show you portraiture. And can you pick out the emotions? And then I'm going to give you the background of the person who was painted. And now you'll get the context of how that person lived their lives and how they interacted with the painter and so forth. Or I might say, we're going to go to a basketball game tonight. I want you to now facially code, just as I did for NBA teams. I want you to facially code the players on the court and the nature of their interactions. So I'll give you another story. So for the Timberwolves in this case, way before Kevin Love admitted that he had anxiety disorder, I knew he had it because more than 20% of his emoting was fear. Well, fear has a really implication for how you interact with your teammates. You don't take in information well when you're frozen. You just don't. It's frozen rope syndrome. There's ice on the transmission lines. And that really impacted how the team could develop. So I might take them there. I might take them to a comedy club, especially if it's a open mic night, and say, let's look at 5 comedians in a row, facially code them, look around to see how they make rapport with the audience. We might take you to a theater event, but I want them to really get out and start to apply it in their lives. Or you could be in Vegas and say, let's go around and look at the gamblers. How are they doing? How are they interacting with the people who's the dealer, the cocktail waitresses? What do they like about what they see in the atmosphere of the place, one casino to another? I want to get them out in the real world and say, this matters, and let's see how it goes. Or even just watch couples interacting in the casino, or it could be on the streets of New York. So that's what I think would really be exciting to do. I want to bring this home for people. So a book is a great starting point, but let's make it part of your experience, your daily experience that you can observe. I want everyone to get to be a Sherlock Holmes. Why not? It's fun.
And the Fast Leader Legion wishes you the very best. All right, here we go, Fast Leader Legion. It's time for the Hump Day Hoedown. Okay, Dan, the Hump Day Hoedown is the part of our show where you give us good insights fast. So I'm going to ask you several questions, and your job is to give us robust yet rapid responses that are going to help us move onward and upward faster. Dan Hill, are you ready to hoedown?
Okay, sure.
All right. So
I have no idea what I'm getting into.
Oh, that's all right. Okay, so what is holding you back from being an even better leader today?
I'm not the best listener sometimes. I'm a great observer. I am so oriented toward visuals. Part of that was in Italy. I didn't know the language. So I didn't get trained and used to picking up that kind of signal as much as the visuals.
So what is the best leadership advice you have ever received?
You got to bring people with you. Don't give them a sense that it's unfair. I was working for the CEO of a company. In the annual employee meetings, he would have people submit the questions in advance, and he'd thumb through the cards at the podium deciding which answers he wanted to give. It looked like it was all rigged, all filtered. So I think as a leader, you got to be able to say, I'm authentic, I'm open, I will take whatever question you give me and I will try to work with it, as opposed to I'm going to shut you down and just go to the places I'm already comfortable with. Because we expect more from a leader, quite frankly, than just them getting to stay in their comfort zone.
So what is one of your secrets that helps you lead in business or life?
Humor. I like to hold on to quotes and quips. I gave you 3 rather quickly earlier. I love the good joke that works for someone. So here's my favorite of late. So 2 old people meet with a fairy godmother. They can get their wish. The wife in the couple says, well, I'd really like to be able to see my grandchildren more often. wish granted. Now the man says, she said, so what's your wish? He said, well, I'm sorry to say this, but I really wish I could be married to someone who's 20 years younger. And poof, just like that, he was 90 rather than 70. A good joke. Everyone likes a good joke. I mean, the writer Milan Kundera said, I never met a KGB agent who had a sense of humor. Don't trust anyone without it. So I think having a sense of humor, it makes you more human. It opens people up. And I like a good joke. I mean, I loved the Marx Brothers when I was growing up. And so I think humor is a godsend for anybody.
And what is one of your tools that helps you make life easier?
Make life easier. Keep it simple. Simple is smart. If I go into a meeting or if I'm on TV, it can be crazy. I can remember sitting in the green room at MSNBC, and I'm like, no one's even told me who's going to be interviewing me. They haven't given me the interview questions. They haven't shown me the stimuli. So, it was on a presidential race. So I said, okay, what is the one thing I want to say about each of the two candidates? So wherever they go, whatever chaos I'm dealing with here, these are the two things I want to get across today. And just, take it with that, and whatever else you get to, great. But don't imagine you're going to accomplish everything. Just get to the essentials.
And what would be one book that you recommend to our Legion? It could be from any genre. Of course, we're going to put a link to Famous Faces Decoded on your show notes page as well.
My favorite book of all time is actually Mrs. Bridge. It was made into a movie with Paul Newman many years ago. And it's about a Kansas City housewife in the 1930s. It's these short little vignettes. And you laugh and you laugh and you laugh until you cry, because deep down she's very lonely. Her husband's working in long hours in his job, and it has so much humanity for you, and it comes to you. And the writer has a sense for the little details, the little things that give it away. He's a really good detective, basically. So it is. I had a professor in grad school who was the best read guy I'd ever met. And I said to him, what's the greatest American novel? And I expected him to say Moby Dick or, F. Scott Fitzgerald, The Great Gatsby. And he said, no, Mrs. Bridge. And I said, you got to be kidding me. I'd never heard of it. And then I went away and I read it and got, that's a really smart professor. So that's my tip for the day, because I think it will make you sensitive to family dynamics and to people, and in the sweetest way possible.
Okay, Fast Leader Legion, you can find links to that and other bonus information from today's show by going to fastleader.net/Dan Hill. Okay, Dan, this is my last Hump Day Hold On question. Imagine you've been given the opportunity to go back to the age of 25, and you can take the knowledge and skills that you have now back with you, but you can't take them all. You can only take one. So what skill or piece of knowledge would you take back with you, and why?
Control the discourse. You only get ahead in life if you keep track of what you want to accomplish, because that's going to draw out your inner creative spirit. I mean, that's what capitalism is based on, the fact that we want to get to our own outcome. I don't think socialism works, actually, because you're just counting on other people getting there for you. And that's just blind to human nature. So you want to control the discourse. I happen to be lucky enough to know Jerome Robbins. This is the choreographer who created West Side Story. He said, well, I started college. I realized it wasn't for me. I said to myself, who's really great in my field? It's Balanchine. He said, so I went over to see Balanchine, and I said to him, he was 20 years old. He said, Balanchine, I love you. I love your work. I love dance. Put me to work in any way you want. I just want to be close to your genius. How could Balanchine not help but be flattered? And he stayed with the company, and he eventually proved himself to be a dance master himself. So I really think you want to figure out where you can take yourself that best brings all of your talent to life, and you season that. The longer you stay with a system and just think the system's fine and going to provide for you, I just don't think that's as strong. Maybe you could join forces in that system, but to just let the system bring it to you, nah.
Dan, I had fun with you today. How can the Fast Leader Legion connect with you?
Well, obviously, I have LinkedIn, like everybody does, seemingly. I have a blog series called Faces of the Week, where I'm looking at things that are in the news, and that's a fun way to connect in. My email is dhill@sensorylogic.com. I absolutely don't mind. I respond to all my emails. Some people don't, but I do. I'm very conscientious that way. So that's at least 3 places for you: the blog, the LinkedIn, and my email itself.
Dan Hill, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom. The Fast Leader Legion honors you and thanks you for helping us get over the hump. Thank you for joining me on the Fast Leader Show today. For recaps, links from every show, special offers, and access to download and subscribe, if you haven't already, Head on over to fastleader.net so we can help you move onward and upward faster.